down my block and now the cops are stopping me. I said, what you doing here? Like, why you trying to talk to me? I said, officer, what am I doing wrong? Let me get just what I came for, I really won't be long. When I told him I had children, he was looking at me differently. Doing what I'm doing, why he gotta clench his fist at me. I came about the dirt, but they still mad cause of my history. I'ma keep on going to the top until they sick of me. Steady protest, but I don't even see a change. Always hearing BLM, but is it really in your brain? Gotta see what's going on, cause we ain't all treated the same. Why so serious? I'm furious, cause this is not no game.
Good afternoon, everybody, and I'd like to welcome you back to NBWA, New Brunswickers Want Action. I'd like to welcome back my co-host, Matthew Martin. Matthew, how are you? And Dr. Timothy Christie. Before we get into the show today, I want to provide some focus. The point of this show is New Brunswickers Want Action. And in our last episode, we talked a little bit about public inquiries. So the outcome that we're looking for at the end of this particular episode is that you understand what public inquiries are and that we need one here in New Brunswick related to systemic discrimination, whole of government approach. So with that outline, I'd like to move into the conversation, and we'll start off with you, Matthew.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of emails coming in kind of asking what exactly does a public inquiry look like. So Tim, I think you have a great explanation of what it looks like.
That's right. So public inquiry is a formal process that is mandated by the government, and they will write the terms of reference for either a person or a group of people to conduct an inquiry into either a specific incident that has happened or into a specific problem that the government thinks is problematic and needs to address. Now, the nice thing with a public inquiry is that they have the ability to subpoena evidence. They can compel witnesses to testify. When the witnesses testify, it's under oath. So it's really a very formal process that they can use to investigate specific issues or policy problems.
So we've been discussing systemic discrimination since the show began, since that is the point, to expose systemic discrimination for what it is. Now, for those of us who live it, we get it, but others need stories. So, Matthew, why don't you fill us in on what's been going on around Eastern Canada most recently?
So I think if we take a look, starting with Quebec, there was recently a shooting in Quebec that the police showed up on scene. They are aware that the individual was in mental distress.
Was it a wellness check?
From what I'm heard, yes.
Okay.
And I say that because the police were aware that he was in mental distress when they arrived on scene. So from there, they set up a kind of an incident scene. They were in their cars. They approached a citizen, the individual. Police got out of the vehicle. The individual went towards the police officers and they shot him dead. So that's in Quebec. If we take a look now in Fredericton, I think we have to give the Fredericton police a little praise, where there was a situation where a man was barricaded into his apartment or his dwelling, and from there he had guns on him. He was pointing his guns at the police officers, but they did get him out without killing him. But he was white.
Oh, okay. Confused there.
So if we also take a look from there and we take a look at the cases for the late Chantel Moore and late Rodney Levi, again, we arrive on scene, wellness checks, both aware that they are there for a mental distress, and these individuals ended up shot and killed. So my question that I raise here is, why are we having this is only 4 examples, but where is the consistency in policing where we can have an individual barricaded in his apartment pointing a gun at an officer and no shots are fired, no one's dead, but then we move to a visible minority and now we have 2 dead individuals with knives?
Now, Tim, you and I discussed these these facts, these events earlier, and you gave a great example of how ridiculous. You made this whole situation sound ridiculous in that where you work.
That's right. So the example I gave was in the hospital.
Mhm.
In the emergency department, for instance, we can have people come in that are in a form of psychosis.
Mhm.
They can be very, very ill. They can be armed as well.
Mhm.
They might think that they're fighting demons, that who knows what voices are in their head,
Mhm.
and they can be very, very disturbed, much like the people we were talking about, and they can be armed.
Mhm.
Nobody in the hospital thinks that the solution here is to kill those people.
Right.
So we might do what's called nonviolent crisis intervention, where we actually have security come in. Some of the people, the frontline workers, will be trained, and we might even overwhelm the person with force. We might tackle them, we might wrestle them to the ground, we might disarm them, but all of the people doing this are not trained law enforcement officers the way police are.
Mhm.
They're frontline healthcare workers and probably security from the hospital.
Mhm.
And none of them are armed. They're not armed with any guns. We don't need to kill those people. So in that situation, like I said, we might wrestle the person, we might hold them, we might restrain them, but we're not going to kill them.
And you're not wearing Kevlar, and you're not carrying a gun, and you get it done without anybody dying.
Exactly. And then after the person has been restrained, nobody puts their knee on their neck. No one takes an extra couple of shots at them or kicks them or punches them. So there's a huge precedent in healthcare that we can deal with patients that are really, really sick. And these people are probably at the most vulnerable point in their life.
Mhm.
And when they're that vulnerable, the solution isn't for thugs called police officers to come and shoot people.
Respectfully, not all police officers are thugs, however.
Well, these guys that shot these people, what
That's
else
the
do we want to
however.
call them? What else can we call them? So I'm saying you can have frontline doctors and nurses and security working in a hospital that will figure out how to de-escalate a situation, figure out how to take care of a situation where no one's getting hurt, and that person that's sick, exhibiting symptoms of their disease, does not die.
And we've got the gentleman who unfortunately was killed in Quebec, okay, the black man. We've got the gentleman in Fredericton most recently who was not killed, notwithstanding he had guns, and his intent was violence towards the police. We've got Chantel Moore, unfortunate fatality during a wellness check. She was wielding a knife, but was killed. Then we have, what is it, Raymond? Mr. Levi, who was again known to the police under the influence of drugs and/or alcohol, was exhibiting drug-induced challenges, and he ends up again a fatality. My challenge here is only one of the people in those examples didn't die, and it was the white person. To me, and let's get into this, it's very apparent that there is some discretion when it comes to how we police black, brown, indigenous folks, and white folks. And the discretion appears to be black and brown folks and indigenous folks may die.
That's
But
right.
we will do everything we can to ensure the white individual doesn't die. I'm only basing my statements on facts that we can all observe. Comments, gentlemen?
Yeah, I think I'd have to agree. I mean, we just look at four cases that are kind of current, but I mean, we can look back to 2018 of a shooting in Fredericton. Although the individual was shot at, it wasn't a fatal shot. Same thing in Moncton. The individual, I don't even believe, was shot at. He surrendered, but nothing was. They still caught him.
And they actually killed people. These are killers
Yeah.
Yeah,
that were
Murderers.
not shot, but they
Yeah.
were white.
they already
And
you
they
know,
were armed with guns, whereas brown people or black people that might have a knife and have a mental illness, they're not malicious, but with a mental illness, are shot dead by the
Understood.
police. And I think it shows that the police officers on the front lines have a significant amount of discretion when they're in a situation. And I think the idea that police officers shoot and kill someone in self-defense is ludicrous. Self-defense is a situation where I have no choice. I'm in a situation and I have to defend myself. And a part of that might be the other person gets hurt or, heaven forbid, even killed. Now, if I'm driving on the street and say a road rage incident happens, and I get out of my car and I go confront someone and something happens, they're not going to let me plead self-defense because they're going to say, you're the one who chose to get out of your car and go into that situation. Now, we pay police to go into these situations. We pay them to do this. We train them to do this. They're going there knowing that it could be a violent situation. They go there knowing that it could escalate. And in some situations, they're the provokers. They provoke it. They're the reason it escalates. And we can see this in many examples. So for a police officer to say, I knowingly went to a situation where I knew someone was exhibiting disease, symptoms of their mental illness, and I know they're probably armed with something, and I was so scared for my life that I had to shoot them dead, that doesn't hold water.
I agree.
You go there knowing. So if you don't have a damn plan for how to deal with this, if you don't have the right backup, if you're not organized, that's on you. So the solution for your unpreparedness is not to kill the person. So I do not accept at all this foolish argument that police make that we had to use lethal force because we were threatened. They go there knowing that.
Agreed. And all of the examples bear that, at least the examples that are on the news every day, bear out, I believe, that particular comment. Absolutely, that police have discretion when it comes to policing. They definitely have discretion when it comes to when they pull their gun out. So why are we calling for a public inquiry? What the hell is that going to do, excuse my language, to the people at home?
I think it is required to hold these people accountable. So we need to be able to look and say, is it really police that we need to do things? So if I have a broken headlight on my car, do I need an armed police officer to stop me and tell me I have a broken headlight? And then that armed police officer is there trying to see if there's anything else. You smell like alcohol, or you smell like marijuana or weed or something, and they provoke it and they escalate it, and they're looking for a reason to do something. If it's a headlight, I don't need an armed police officer to do that.
That's right.
So the arguments that people are putting about defund the police and that type of thing, I'm very sympathetic, because the police are doing a lot of things we don't need trained, armed people to do. Someone with a knife on the street, you don't need armed police officers to deal with that. Like I said, in the hospital, we deal with it all the time. No one's armed, no one has a gun, and we don't end up killing our patients because they're exhibiting the symptoms of their disease. So these, like I said, for lack of better words, thugs on street corners that are really, some of them are no better than a punk in a uniform. And they need to be, we need to get them out of these places, and we need to restrict their activities to things that are appropriate for them to do. And a public inquiry can help us do that study. And it won't be just into police.
A whole government approach, as I
Exactly.
suggested.
We need to look at the education system, where racial discrimination is happening against visible minorities in the education system, trying to deter them from going to university, teachers that are on them. We need it in the healthcare system, where some patients, unfortunately, like we saw the example in Montreal last time we talked about, where an Indigenous person had to film her own death.
Echiquan.
Yes, she filmed her own death because the people in the hospital were racist. So we need an entire public inquiry of systemic discrimination throughout the entire government sector.
So this is what we're asking for, and I believe that all of the facts and the events that we've discussed today, and look, all you got to do is turn on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, any one of those mediums to see what's happening in our world. So when people come to me and say, or deny systemic discrimination, or ask how that could possibly be, I wonder if they're watching the same TV as me.
I think I have people now coming up to me and saying, oh, Matthew, you've never experienced racism. You're so well-spoken and well-dressed. And I think it goes back to, like we talked about,
our clothes,
in our last
folks.
episode. Some people, they might not be aware of racism, but if you put 100 minorities in a room and say this happened, they'd all go, yep, that's true, that happened. And I think it's, for people to tell me like I don't experience racism is really just a form of racism in itself.
Agreed. Look, we can go on all day. I've got a similar story. A gentleman recently said to me because I was talking about my struggle to become the first black lawyer in St. John in 200 years, hopefully the first black counselor in 2021 in at least 10 to 15 years. How did you struggle, Neil? You're a lawyer. How'd you get where you are? And totally ignoring my commentary about systemic discrimination, notwithstanding, some of us break through. Some of us break through. But moving forward, I'd asked you, Tim, what is a public inquiry going to do? And we got into the context that you discussed, but really, we're asking the province with a whole of government approach. We've seen situations, we've seen evidence. The government itself has agreed systemic discrimination is an issue. So if you agree, and we agree, and the community agrees that it's an issue, why would calls for a public inquiry not already have been made? Just my thoughts.
Well, part of the problem is that it's being made to people who don't experience systemic discrimination.
That's right.
If we look at our current government, we look at cabinet, they're all white. So now we're trying to say to a whole bunch of white people, could you investigate yourselves?
Some of whom are our friends, so we understand perspective.
Yeah, but we're asking them to investigate themselves.
Yep.
To do an inquiry into themselves. And they don't think that they're racist, and I don't think they are either. But that doesn't mean the system is designed in a way to be fair to visible minorities.
So if we talk about a public inquiry, and you just made a comment there, it's about people investigating themselves. So we'd be looking at an external third party coming in and
well,
providing
that's the parameters of a public inquiry, is that it's public and transparent, and everybody can watch the proceedings every step of the way. Nothing's done in camera, nothing's done secret. And this is where reality needs to be exposed. We need an inquiry into why New Brunswick has such a foolish Human Rights Act. We need an inquiry into why New Brunswick has such an incompetent and inefficient Human Rights Commission. These things are unforgivable. People spend a lot of money trying to go through that process and they don't get any justice.
So we've got issues, again, Tim speaking on your own behalf with a professional opinion about the Human Rights Commission. We've got 2 dead individuals of indigenous background. We've got 1 white individual who was arrested unscathed, is my understanding.
After pointing guns at the police. And they
So
chose not to kill that person because they didn't have to.
The only way, in our opinion, is, folks, to get around discretionary policing when it comes to Indigenous, Black, and Brown folks is to do a whole of government approach. Look at this from a public perspective. As Tim said, undertake the investigations. And why does our show exist? Don't you wonder why we're here? Someone didn't say, hey, won't you go on TV and tell lies? They said, go on TV and tell your story. We're not making this up. This isn't just fodder for television. We're trying to help you understand who we are and what we're experiencing as part of your community. That's why Dr. Christie spends his time here with you. That's why Matthew Martin comes here every Sunday and spends his time with you. You asked for help understanding? Well, a whole of government approach related to a public inquiry specifically investing systemic discrimination in New Brunswick, in the criminal justice system, the education system, social systems, health system. The evidence is clear. Gentlemen, would you agree? It's time.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well,
it's time to make a change.
It's not unprecedented. So
it's been done before.
Like I was saying before, we had a series of children that died while under the care of the province before. So
right.
Specifically Jacqueline Brewer and John Ryan Turner back in the 90s.
Right, and I lived in that area at the time.
That's right. So these kids were receiving multiple services from multiple government departments, and they ended up dying from abuse and neglect, basically at the hands of their parents. And at that time, they had what's called a Child Death Review Committee, where the government said, there's a very serious problem here if we have children dying while they're receiving so many different government services. Since there's a problem, we need to look at the system and fix it. Now, the Child Death Review Committee process has a lot of criticisms. It's not a public inquiry. It's not a transparent process, but it is a precedent. And we can see from there, they fixed a lot of problems in government. We made it so that different departments can't use confidentiality as an excuse not to talk to each other, and they looked at all of the barriers that led to these children dying, and they wanted to fix them. Chantal Moore and Mr. Levi were involved with multiple government departments, and they end up dead. That's evidence that there's a problem, that we don't have people interacting with healthcare, justice, education systems, social development, with all these different departments because we want them to end up dead. If that's the outcome, then the government should be able to say, there's a problem here, let's find out what the problem is and fix it. And that's all we're asking for, is there is a problem. There's no doubt about it. People are ending up dead, shot and killed by the police. Therefore, what's the solution? In our province. So what is a solution? A possible solution is to conduct a public inquiry that's objective and transparent, and put all the facts on the table, and then this public inquiry will be able to make recommendations to government for what are the barriers, what are the obstacles, what are the problems, and here are some potential solutions.
You heard it here, folks. Matthew Martin, Dr. Timothy Christie, Real Deal Neil, as you all know. I think we're making some logical sense here. I don't think we're asking for anything unreasonable. If you folks also believe that there should be a whole-of-government approach to a public inquiry related to systemic discrimination, then reach out to us at NBWA at CHCO.TV. We welcome your questions. We welcome your comments. We welcome your ideas for new content and subject matter. I think my colleagues here would appreciate your help. But again, reach out to us at NBWA at CHCO.TV. We want to hear what you think. It's got to be a two-way conversation. We need your help to help you understand.
And I think people should also be writing the Premier of New Brunswick, explaining why they think we need a public.
Write your MLA. If you feel strongly that systemic discrimination is wrong, racial discrimination should be criminalized, write the Premier. Write your MLA. Write us. We want to hear from you.
And when they give us their foolish reasons for why they don't want to do it, ask them, what the hell are you so scared of? Why are you so scared of a public inquiry into systemic discrimination?
So I think over the last few episodes, we've really looked at and discussed why we need a public inquiry. And I think it should be very clear to our viewers at home, for anybody who's watching, that it's needed. We've discussed the flaws within our medical system, our policing system, our governments. I think it's time that our government now, as like Tim said, what are they scared of? I think that's now the government needs to admit that, well, they already have admitted that it is, racial discrimination and systemic racism is in our government system, and I think it's time that they just stop trying to put it under the carpet, and it's time to just put it out in the open and grow and move forward as an inclusive community.
Timothy?
I agree completely with Matthew. I think the future of our province, for instance, is going to be immigration. And to have people come as immigrants to New Brunswick, they're going to be from all races, all ethnic backgrounds, very diverse. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's what we want. But we need a province that's hospitable to that. If we have people in charge of our province who at some level agree that systemic discrimination happens, but at another level refuse to do anything about it.
Exactly.
How can we say this is a welcoming province to immigrants?
It's not very inviting.
Exactly. So they know there's a problem. They know what they can do about it. We don't have the solutions right now. That's why we need to study it properly. But I can say that people
there are lots of first steps that a government can take, though, for example, the inquiry to start. But
that's exactly my point, is that we can do a public inquiry. That inquiry will be open, transparent. It will be having people testify under oath. They can subpoena documents, and then it can make recommendations. And then we can have our politicians debate the recommendations publicly. What are the pros and cons of implementing these recommendations? But everything is in the spirit of trying to make things better.
Right.
And the white people in charge of things right now don't know how bad it is for people that are visible minorities, and therefore it's invisible to them. And what we're trying to do is say, guys, it might be invisible to you, but it doesn't mean it's not a problem.
Exactly.
When you cannot get through the Human Rights Commission, when the Human Rights Commission dismisses most complaints that are on discrimination, there's a huge problem. You can't get justice in this province.
Matthew Martin, Dr. Timothy Christie, I want to thank you both for assisting and helping me co-host today. I thought it was a very important discussion. You folks know we're talking about systemic discrimination and the existence thereof in New Brunswick, often denied, but the reality is clear. Based on the evidence and the facts that we've presented today, it's absolutely clear. This province, as a whole government approach, needs to have a public inquiry into the existence of systemic discrimination. If you agree, email us, NBWA@CHCO.TV. If you don't agree, email us. Email the Premier if you want a public inquiry into systemic discrimination. Email your MLA. But also, if you just have questions and you want to give us some ideas, please feel free. You can reach myself, The Real Deal Neil, Matthew Martin, or Dr. Timothy Christie, again at NBWA@CHCO.TV. Thank you very much for joining us today, and make it a great day.